Hello guys. Tonight we start with something a bit much less instructional and loads extra natural. A trip through the foggy, fragrant world of medieval intoxication. Yes, they did it, but agree with me. Things got weird and every so often notably innovative. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to just like the video and subscribe. However best if you truly experience what I do right here. And allow me know within the comments wherein you are tuning in from and what time it's far for you. It is constantly fascinating to peer who's becoming a member of us from round the world. Now dim the lights, perhaps switch on a fan for that smooth history hum, and let's ease into tonight's adventure collectively. It's tempting to assume the middle a long time as a grim, mud-covered parade of clergymen, plagues, and potatoes. But underneath all that wool and melancholy, there have been human beings, normal, unsuitable, experimental humans, who occasionally checked out an unusual route and thought, nicely, let's examine what happens if I drink this with hot wine. And to be truthful, who should blame them? There was no energy, no coffee, no antidepressants, and the nearby amusement turned into both looking a night try to study or wondering how lengthy your neighbor ought to keep dancing earlier than collapsing from ergot poisoning. So if a person informed you there was a mushroom that made you forget the feudal machine for some hours, you'll possibly chew it, too. Contrary to trendy assumptions, the idea of the use of materials to expand the mind, escape ache, or virtually make one's day slightly less terrible wasn't uncommon. It became baked proper into the tradition. But it wasn't referred to as getting high. There were no medieval stoner duos laughing behind the hay stacks. It became wrapped in phrases like visionary states, divine notion, pain remedy, or in extreme instances, oh. Doctors used herbs. Monks grew them. Witches, depending on who you requested, applied them. And almost everybody encountered those substances in a few shape through medication, ritual, or unintentional intake of moldy bread. Again, the variety of medieval intoxicants wasn't restrained to a tankard of heat ale, though that helped. That they had roots that screamed, plant life that blurred vision, seeds that triggered prophetic goals, and ointments that made human beings believe they had been flying bare via the sky with Devil's Catering Group. Getting high wasn't always recreational. It was medicinal, spiritual, or from time to time just very terrible judgment on an empty belly. And relying to your social rank, it might were delivered through a barber, a nun, or a barefoot peasant named Wolf, who learned it from a totally clever squirrel. In the medieval international, you failed to want a shady lower back alley, or a velvetroped membership to get your hands on mind-changing substances. All you wanted became a lawn, a mortar and pestle, and a vague brush aside for dosage. Because in the one's days, nature was the dealer, and he or she wasn't usually mild. Medieval Europe became overflowing with flowers, roots, fungi, and resins that could either treatment your headache or make you accept as true with you'd married a tree. The line between medicine and mystical ride was, let's assume, artistically interpreted. Physicians, priests, midwives, and wandering herbalists all dabbled in botany with varying stages of training and exuberance. In case you wanted something to knock you out, calm your nerves, or make you see God on your soup, they had alternatives. Take henbane as an example. This plant turned into like nature's model of Russian roulette. Well prepared, it eased pain and brought on sleep. Improperly prepared, it introduced you to an entirely new set of troubles, like convulsions and a sturdy preference to do away with your personal footwear whilst jogging via the woods screaming. Or mandrake. The basis formed vaguely like a human figure. Legend said it screamed when pulled from the floor, a noise so lethal it can kill a person. That didn't prevent humans from digging it up anyway, typically with the aid of tying it to a canine and status a long way away. Ingesting mandrake could result in unconsciousness, visions, and on a great day, prophetic dreams. On a bad day, well, you wouldn't be desiring herbs anymore. Then there was belladonna, also known as deadly nightshade, which is exactly the form of name that screams perhaps not. It become used to dilate scholars for splendor, but additionally to deal with pain, purpose hallucinations, and every now and then loss of life. Medieval self-care changed into an ambitious business. These herbs were often blended into teas, tinctures, oils, or those famous flying ointments we'll get to soon, and that they were not always fed on voluntarily. Every so often they were applied at some point of non-secular ceremonies, medical methods, or by means of a nicely meaning apothecary who thought a little more root can't hurt, but harm it is able to. Henbane, the medieval equivalent of, let's have a look at what this button does. Recognized to botanists as *Hyoscyamus niger, and to all of us else because the stuff that made Uncle Bernard suppose he changed into a duck, henbane changed into a staple of the middle, a long-time unofficial pharmacy. Used across Europe for centuries, henbane wasn't only an informal plant. It became a mood. Clergymen recorded its residences in herbals. Physicians used it to stupid ache. Witches used it to experience broomstick via their imaginations. And peasants mostly was hopping now not to devour it with the aid of accident. So what precisely did henbane do? Nicely, that depends. In small doses, it acted as a sedative. It can ease toothaches, help with insomnia, and make childbirth slightly less demanding. In different words, it was the medieval model of take two and strive now not to scream. But in larger doses or just poorly timed ones, henbane ought to motive delirium, hallucinations, wild agitation, and in a few cases, a heartfelt communication with a turnip you notion become your deceased grandmother. It incorporates scopolamine and hyoscyamin, which intrude with neurotransmitters in the brain. To place it non-scientifically, your medieval mind gets bizarre speedy. Visual distortions, disorientation, dry mouth, severe thirst, and spontaneous outbursts of interpretive dance have been all at the menu. Henbane was frequently smoked, brewed into teas, or even combined with fat, and smeared on the pores and skin, a famous transport approach for anyone who failed to like their focus organized in a linear style. Now turned into a felony. Technically, yes. Controlled substances weren't a component yet, but it turned into controversial, mainly with the church. Anything that altered notion becomes suspicious. Visions have been alleged to come from saints, no longer shrubs. Still, henbane had fanatics among healers, mystics, and those with not anything to lose. It even made its manner into beer recipes earlier than being banned in want of safer components like hops. Few plants in the medieval global were as feared, respected, and dramatically misunderstood as mandrake, a root so potent and weirdly human-shaped that it sparked a mixture of botany, folklore, and sheer panic. Botanically called *Mandragora officinarum *, the mandrake was associated with sleep, hallucinations, fertility, and an excessive possibility of either mystical visions or waking up in a ditch subsequent to a pressured goat. Both way, something passed off. Medieval herbalists believed that the foundation, which frequently resembled a stubby, contorted human figure, contained powerful magical and medicinal houses. It changed into a sedative, an anesthetic, an aphrodisiac, and consistent with some, a conduit to prophetic goals. You can boil it in wine to calm ache, or you can inhale its fumes and right away question all of your existence selections. But the real repute of the mandrake came from its alleged addiction of screaming when uprooted. Yes, screaming as in, "Do not pull me out of the dust or you'll die from the noise." The kind of screaming. Medieval texts warned that definitely hearing the mandrake's cry ought to kill a man, which evidently caused some innovative harvesting techniques. The maximum famous concerned tying the foundation to a dog, on foot away, and letting the poor animal do the grimy paintings. The belief was that the dog could die as opposed to you. A plan that increases a few moral crimson flags, even by using medieval standards. As soon as harvested and the dog nicely mourned, the mandrake may be dried, powdered, steeped, or worn as a charm. A few humans even carried tiny mandrake figures in pouches to ward off evil or promote fertility, because nothing says romance like a mummified root that feels like it's seen things. The church predictably didn't love mandrakes, something that prompted visions and wasn't tied to organized religion become dealt with as witchcraft adjacent. Still, priests recorded mandrake recipes in herbals with suspiciously special commands. Used efficiently, mandrake may want to dull ache before surgical operation, deal with insomnia, and create trippy, vibrant goals. Used incorrectly, it may motive vomiting, unconsciousness, or your family staging an exorcism due to the fact you thought your soup changed into whispering. Shall we say you had been a medieval, noble lady hopping to draw attention at a banquet? You could wear your pleasant linen. You may braid vegetation into your hair. Or if you have been sincerely severe, you can drip literal poison into your eyes. Input belladonna, additionally called atropa belladonna, or more truly, deadly nightshade. The name alone seems like a very last boss in a medieval RPG. And yes, it was both desirable and deadly. The botanical equivalent of a seductive but risky ex. The name belladonna means beautiful lady, due to the fact when some drops of its extract had been added to the eyes, it dilated the pupils. Extensive eyes have been considered appealing, mysterious, and perhaps even a bit saintly. Of direction, the drawback become blurry vision, light sensitivity, and the occasional unintended overdose. But Haya, beauty requirements have by no means been in particular forgiving. Cosmetics apart, belladonna had different abilities. It changed into used as a painkiller, a sleep aid, and occasionally as a truth serum, even though the truth it produced become frequently alongside the strains of the ceiling is dripping Latin prayers. The plant includes atropine and scopolamine, both of which mess with the apprehensive system in ways that range from mildly trippy to, why is the wallpaper vibrating? It become a not unusual factor in potions, flying ointments, and some very questionable scientific approaches. Want to numb a affected person before sawing off a limb. Belladonna. Want to simulate a dying-like sleep for theatrical or suspicious purposes. Belladonna. Need to by accident meet a few saints and possibly the devil for your dreams. You get the concept. And yet, notwithstanding its toxicity, belladonna become a part of the medieval clinical toolkit. Physicians used it carefully or recklessly, depending on how terrible the plague was that week, and it suggests up in herbals, recipes, and love charms across Europe. Before cutting-edge edibles came in discreet packaging and fruity flavors, medieval folks have been already getting imaginative, just no longer with chocolate. As an alternative, they relied on ointments, balms, tinctures, and potions. And permits be clear, the word ointment hardly ever inspires confidence, especially when it includes elements like belladonna, fat from a black cat, and a questionable quantity of hemlock stirred counterclockwise under a complete moon. Welcome to the sector of medieval transdermal delivery systems, or in undeniable English, rubbing weird paste to your pores and skin and hopping for the pleasant. These concoctions weren't made for a casual weekend buzz. Many had been tied to rituals, people medicine, and spiritual experiences. They may knock you out, send you into ecstatic trances, or if misused, cause you to believe you have been becoming a lizard. Software was often topical, which sounds more secure, until you study the favored absorption factors had been the mucous membranes. Yes, the ones membranes. Cue the notorious flying ointments associated with witches. A cute blend of henbane, mandrake, belladonna, and pig fat, frequently carried out to, allows just say, intimate regions. The intention, a euphoric sensation of flying. The result, either a transcendent astral adventure or waking up in a haystack with one to your tooth and no memory of how you purchased there. Beyond the salves, medieval potions have been regularly ate up in wine, broth, or some liquid that smelled like regret. Apothecaries cherished mixing poppy extract with spiced wine. a mixture strong enough to numb you at some point of surgery, or provide you with the front row seat to a divine revelation you did not ask for. And permits no longer forget the elixir offered with the aid of wandering quacks. These touring pharmacists promise to remedy the whole thing from heartbreak to plague, often the use of recipes that could additionally dissolve a shoe. Did they work? Perhaps. Or perhaps they simply made you neglect what became wrong inside the first area. The magic of these medieval edibles changed into that no one should pretty are expecting the outcome. Could you sleep peacefully, commune with angels, or scream at the moon and swear eternal loyalty to a turnip? Only one manner to find out. Allows communicate about the broomstick, that iconic airborne companion of the medieval witch. It would appear old-fashioned now, the stuff of fairy testimonies and Halloween costumes. However returned then, it came with an awkwardly scandalous backstory. Spoiler, the broomstick wasn't only for sweeping. The relationship among witches and broomsticks certainly has chemical roots. And no longer simply mander. Historical statistics, especially the ones written by means of suspicious inquisitors, describe witches using flying ointments, thick trance-inducing salves crafted from plants like henbane, belladonna, and datura, all of which can be about as pleasant as a drunk porcupine. But right here's the kicker. Those ointments weren't taken through mouth. Why? Because the elements were poisonous, and stomachs are famously ungrateful. Rather, they were applied topically. And by means of topically, we mean mucous membranes. And by way of mucous membranes, we suggest, yes, exactly what you're wondering. Therefore, the broomstick, or as some sources delicately phrased it, a staff anointed for transportation. The cope with changed into, used as a car for making use of the ointment to areas with high absorption. Now not exactly PG, but notably powerful. Within Mins, users reported visions of flying via the night sky, attending feasts with the devil, or really hovering above the village like the International's most careworn drone. Of course, those had been hallucinations, but in an age wherein medicinal drug, magic, and mysticism shared a bunk bed, nobody wondered at a good deal. Inquisitors and theologians took notice, of course, now not due to the fact they had been interested in pharmacology, but due to the fact they saw flying as proof of consorting with demons. That's ironic considering the hallucinations have been chemically brought about and deeply unreliable. But when has medieval justice ever wanted proof? Even as medieval Europe turned into busy making use of poison to broomsticks and calling it air journey, something a ways greater state-of-the-art was occurring to the south and east within the flourishing towns of the Islamic Golden Age. Input cannabis, the plant-based totally solution to existential dread and camel traffic. Derived from cannabis resin, hashish became extensively used in areas like Persia, Egypt, and the Levant. And in contrast to Europe's rub this on your elbow and meet Satan approach, Islamic pupils, mystics, and physicians really documented its results with a stage of detail that indicates discipline checking out. Cannabis was regularly fed on orally, commonly blended with honey, spices, or other herbs, making it the first suitable for eating to definitely taste suitable, instead of medieval Europe's way of life of bitter teas and matters that smelled like spoiled socks. Its use wasn't just recreational, even though yes, that truly passed off. Cannabis changed into regularly tied to Sufism, the mystical department of Islam, where practitioners sought spiritual union with the divine. Cannabis changed into believed to assist dissolve the ego, clear the mind, and initiate deep contemplation, or at the least inspire lengthy thoughtful stares at walls. In truth, many Sufi poets and philosophers referred to cannabis, the way present-day songwriters communicate about awful breakups with severe emotion, summary metaphors, and just sufficient fog to make you surprise in the event that they had been okay. Of root, now not everybody changed into a fan. Many Islamic rulers tried to prohibit cannabis use periodically, fearing it caused laziness, ethical decay, or humans laughing too much at some point of prayer. However, like maximum substance bans in history, this had roughly the identical fulfillment charge as coaching a cat to juggle. The mythical **Hashishin**, the authentic assassins, were even stated to have used hashish before missions to get into the proper mindset for stabbing. That claims in the main fantasy, but it's an exceptional example of how hashish primarily based products had been already wrapped in both mystique and suspicion. In the meantime, Europe was centuries far from expertise how to use cannabis without right away placing something on fire or calling it devil grass. When you photo a medieval church, you may think stained glass, flickering candles, solemn chanting, and that thick, nearly otherworldly cloud of incense wafting through the air like God's personal fog machine. But incense wasn't just about holiness. It additionally had a little something more, psychoactive capacity. Let's begin with the two heavy hitters, frankincense and myrrh. Both renews materials imported from the Arabian Peninsula and East Africa. Burned in church buildings, temples, and royal courts. They were intended to cleanse the air, ward off evil spirits, and make the whole lot odor barely much less like unwashed wool and fish stew. But here's the twist. Present-day studies have shown that burning frankincense releases compounds, specifically incensol acetate, that could affect the brain's limbic gadget. Translation: in case you sat in sufficient smoke, Gregorian chant wasn't the most effective thing making your head sense floaty. In poorly ventilated medieval chapels, which is to say they all, extended exposure to incense could cause a mild tranquilizing impact, in particular if paired with fasting, dehydration, or extreme boredom. It wasn't unusual for monks or devotees to report visions at some point of long offerings. And whilst they frequently credited divine notion, it's miles feasible some had been just gently buzzed from resin fumes. And in case you think this was constrained to Christian areas, think once more. Incense turned into a not unusual fixture in mosques, synagogues, Buddhist temples, and even pre-Christian pagan rites. It transcended faith. All of us loves a very good vibe. Apparently, clerics insisted the incense helped lift the soul to heaven. Realistically, it can have just softened the edges of fact enough to make 5-hour sermons a bit greater tolerable. Think about it, because the medieval equivalent of setting on lo-fi beats and lighting a scented candle, however with more Latin and much less chill. If there was one factor medieval human beings should count on, except taxes and the occasional plague, it turned into alcohol. Beer, ale, mead, wine, cider, you call it. A person become brewing it in a timber barrel behind their residence and calling it remedy. And in a manner it was. Water wasn't precisely safe to drink. Maximum herbal sources were either contaminated or casually downstream from farm animals, which supposed sipping from a circulate become essentially playing intestinal roulette. So, as a substitute, human beings reached for something a little extra fermented. Enter small beer, the medieval model of La Croix, however with alcohol and a much higher risk of being brewed through a person named Edith, who measured components by way of intuition and prayer. This low-alcohol drink turned into ate up every day by means of adults and kids alike, no longer to get inebriated, however to stay alive with a mild buzz and ordinary hydration. Of course, not all medieval alcohol became so tame. In case you were wealthier or clearly had fewer plans for the day, you might choose more potent ale, honeymead, or imported wine. And yes, wine turned into often blended with herbs or spices, both for taste, medicinal effect, or just to peer what happened. In monasteries, brewing beer became almost a sacred responsibility. Monks perfected recipes, documented fermentation methods, and taste-tested the effects, frequently with exceptional enthusiasm. If salvation got here in pints, the Benedictines had been properly ahead of the curve. But alcohol wasn't just a drink. It became a lifestyle enhancer. Need to dull the pain of medieval dentistry. Ale. Want to deal with depression. Spiced wine. Want to forget about you live in a drafty hovel with 6 other people and one extremely judgmental hen. Mead. Taverns, inns, and roadside ale houses served as medieval remedy places of work, only with greater yelling. People drank to rejoice, mourn, gossip, and sometimes invent entirely new dance patterns nobody requested for. From time to time, getting high within the middle, a long time wasn't a decision. It turned into just breakfast. Enter ergot, a parasitic fungus that grows on rye and other cereal grains. To the untrained medieval eye, it appeared like a barely bizarre blackened kernel. To the modern scientist, it is a biological prank with facet outcomes that study like a medieval curse. Convulsions, hallucinations, burning limbs, and from time to time the feeling that your hands have changed into spiders. This fungus turned into the unintentional component in what a few historians name the original LSD trip. Centuries before the summertime of love, Woodstock, or something with tie-dye, humans in parts of Europe, particularly in colder, damp areas like France and the Germanic territories, frequently baked bread from infected rye. Why? Because hunger trumps fungus consciousness. And so, whole villages might unknowingly ingest ergot-laced loaves. And the outcomes had been each superb and horrifying. There were two varieties of ergotism. Yes, it had a call. Convulsive ergotism, characterized through muscle spasms, seizures, hallucinations, and fits of laughter or panic. Gangrenous ergotism, where blood go with the flow become reduce off, mane to limbs blackening, shriveling, and falling off. Not ideal for dinner parties. Neighborhood outbreaks led to weird public behavior, consisting of dancing plagues, where groups of humans danced uncontrollably for days, every now and then till dying. On the time it was blamed on demons, divine punishment, or ethical weak spot. But in reality, it could have just been a mass case of unintentional mushroom toast. Satirically, the Order of St. Anthony, which ran hospitals for the bothered, helped treat victims of ergotism, regularly through feeding them wheat-based totally diets instead of rye. So yes, the cure became distinct bread. Did people connect the dots? Now not certainly. To a medieval baker, bread was either great or genuinely possessed, and no one changed into trying out for psychoactive alkaloids in their porridge. They were too busy trying not to be excommunicated. Even these days, a few pupils agree with ergot played a position within the Salem witch trials. Hallucinations, fits, paranoia, all very ergotic, but it truly is still debated. What's now not debated? Medieval Europe got high on toast and didn't even know it. You've heard of magic mushrooms. You've got heard of flying ointments. But have you ever heard of mad honey? Yes. In some unique corners of the medieval world, even the bees had been in on it. This wasn't your common grocery store honey, mind you. We're talking about a rare type produced inside the mountainous Black Sea areas of Anatolia, contemporary-day Turkey, where bees feasted on rhododendron flowers, quite crimson blooms with a dark mystery. They're laced with grayanotoxins, naturally taking place compounds that do not play well with the human anxious gadget. The result, mad honey, a substance so powerful it could bring forth dizziness, hallucinations, vomiting, slowed coronary heart rate, and spiritual visions, typically in that order. Consumed in small doses, it provided a mild buzz. In large doses, it became your day right into a gradual movement opera starring your very own eyebrows. This wasn't only a neighborhood curiosity. It became weaponized. Consistent with historical and medieval sources, invading armies had been as soon as intentionally poisoned with mad honey, left in the back of abandoned villages. Squatties thought they'd scored unfastened snacks. Alternatively, they ended up convulsing at the forest ground, realizing too past due that loot is not to be depended on. Greek and Roman authors like Xenophon and Strabo wrote about those consequences centuries in advance, but the use continued properly into the Center Ages. Locals knew a way to manage the stuff. A little on bread for a headache, a little in wine for visions, or none at all in case you clearly wanted to keep in mind your own call by way of dusk. Mad honey became known as a treatment and a leisure substance, mainly in mystical or folks recuperation traditions. A few customers claimed it brought prophetic dreams, even as others just awakened clutching a potato they believed was their uncle. Results various, and yes, it changed into traded. A few ambitious merchants offered it in small ceramic jars, typically without dosage commands, because who wishes caution labels whilst you live in an era wherein leeches are considered sophisticated medicine? Now not absolutely everyone within the center a long time was a priest, a noble, or a plague-ridden peasant. Some folks operated inside the shadowy margins of society as shamans, herbalists, cunning folk, and other semi-valid practitioners of medicine and mischief. Think of them as medieval pharmacists with zero regulation and a deep personal courting with moss. These were the people you visited when the local health practitioner counseled bloodletting in your toothache. They had no degrees, however, that they had natural information passed down through generations, often discovered by means of looking grandma treat boils with bark and dignity. And when it got here to mind-altering materials, these folks were your go-to. They knew which vegetation to grind into paste, which roots to soak in wine, and what sort of a given herb might make you dream of angels in place of by accident be part of them. Whether you had been seeking to relieve ache, result in visions, curse your neighbor, or have an out-of-body experience at some point of laundry, they'd a treatment or three. A lot of those practitioners were women, midwives, wise girls and healers who had been vital to their communities and deeply feared by means of authority figures. No longer because they had been cackling into cauldrons, but due to the fact they knew too much and failed to need Latin to explain it. Their remedies regularly blanketed henbane, mandrake, belladonna, and poppy derivatives. That they had mixed them with wine, fat, honey, or spit, not kidding. Chant some protective terms and ship you to your manor with something that might either heal you or make you passionately confess to crimes you by no means dedicated. Of course, if something went wrong, say, a hallucination regarding flying goats or the surprising urge to marry a tree, blame shifted speedy from poor batch to witchcraft. The church and local government saved one eye on these people, and the other eye nervously twitching. Still, groups depended on them. While your child had a fever, whilst your joints ached, or when you had to touch a useless relative to ask wherein they hid the least money, these were the people you became too. They weren't doctors. They weren't monks. They were the unique, underground well-being influencers. So in spite of everything, the salves, brews, roots, ointments, incense, bees, and questionable bread, one big question remains. How did medieval human beings actually experience approximately getting high? The answer conflicted. Deeply, hilariously conflicted. For a few, in particular healers and herbalists, mind-altering materials were a practical device. If it dulled ache, slowed a fevered mind, or made childbirth 1% less frightening, it became welcomed. This became remedy, not mischief. Certain, the affected person might begin reciting psalms backward or insisting the cat become talking French. But if the swelling went down, achievement. Then there were the non-secular users, clergymen, mystics, and people dabbling in divine verbal exchange. For them, hallucinations were not pink flags. They have been revelations. Visions had been symptoms of sanctity, not signs. If you stared into the void, and the void whispered back in Latin, you had been on the fast tune to sainthood, or at least getting your very own chapel mural. But purpose mattered. Getting excessive via twist of fate. Excellent. Getting excessive to see Jesus. Suitable. Getting excessive to flirt with a goat demon. Now we've got a problem. It is where the church stepped in, branding positive substances and their users as suspicious at satisfactory, heretical at worst. Something related to lack of manage, be it intoxication, trance, or inconvenient honesty, raised clerical eyebrows. Saints should have visions. Peasants, possibly just possessed. Meanwhile, many of the not unusual people, reviews have been extra relaxed. Your acquaintances sound a sleep potion, may additionally have doubled as a psychedelic nighttime cap. Humans used poppy wine for pain, hashish for calm, and henbane tea for handling the illegal guidelines. It wasn't visible as mystical or rebellious. It turned into just a part of the medication chest right subsequent to the garlic and prayers. In the end, how the high turned into considered got here all the way down to who you have been, what you were using, and whether or not everyone tattled. Inside the medieval mind, altered states lived in a peculiar gray region, among miracle and misdemeanor, fitness and heresy. And in a world where demons, saints, plagues, and turnip famines all walked hand in hand, a touch natural escape now and then, hardly the worst idea. Within the ancient world, the ocean wasn't a void to be crossed. It changed into the beating heart of empire. It carried grain, gold, messages, soldiers, and once in a while warfare. Whoever commanded the sea didn't just own the water. They dictated the destiny of whole civilizations. In contrast to land battle in which terrain formed battles, naval conflict became about control, of drift, of trade, of communication, and of get right of entry too. For seafaring empires like Athens, Carthage, and Egypt, naval supremacy wasn't non-compulsory. It was existential. Without fleets, cities had been vulnerable to isolation, starvation, and siege. With fleets, they may blockade enemies, guard merchant convoys, or even land forces deep behind enemy strains. Take the Mediterranean, for instance. It wasn't known as the Center Sea for nothing. This inland ocean linked 3 continents and limitless cultures. To dominate, it supposed having a finger on the pulse of everything from Phoenician exchange routes to Roman grain shipments. The ocean should carry wealth as unexpectedly as it may deliver catastrophe. That is why ancient powers poured assets into naval infrastructure, harbors, shipyards, dry docks, and navies. For Athens, the military became its lifeblood. Themistocles' vision of a trireme-powered navy became Athens into a thalassocracy, a sea-based empire. Its ships guarded grain routes from Egypt, levied tribute from allies, and crushed Persian goals at battles like Salamis. Carthage, then again, emerged as a naval titan from service provider roots. Its dockyards were some of the maximum advanced of the historic world, producing warships on a nearly industrial scale. Carthaginian dominance wasn't just about army electricity. It changed into subsidized through generations of sailors and navigators who understood the ocean like a second skin. Egypt, with its strategic area at the mouth of the Nile and Red Sea, additionally relied heavily on fleets to protect trade with the Levant and Nubia. Even though greater riverine in orientation, Egyptian warships advanced into seafaring vessels able to skirmishing with pirates and escorting treasure ships. In these types of instances, naval struggle wasn't a sideshow. It became the principal occasion. The sea changed into wherein opponents clashed, alliances were damaged, and empires either flourished or floundered. Mastery of naval techniques, generation, and geography gave upward thrust to legends. And when the one's fleets burned or sank, so too did the fortunes of the amazing. The trireme was now not only a deliverer, it turned into a weapon. Sleek, speedy, and lethal, it described historical naval conflict across the Mediterranean. And even though many city-states constructed them, none wielded them pretty like the Athenians. With 3 degrees of oars and a bronze-tipped ram, the trireme turned into the historic equal of a guided missile, one powered through sweat, rhythm, and method. A regular trireme measured approximately 120 feet lengthy and just 18 ft wide. Slender, sure, however that was the factor. Its slim hull allowed it to slice via water with minimum drag, whilst its low draft let it operate close to shore for raids and landings. The call trireme comes from its 3 rows of oars stacked vertically. Those were not random rowers either. Every became a trained seaman, understanding how to pass in unison, at speeds of as much as 9 knots in conflict. The trireme's most fearsome feature, the ram. A bronze-sheathed prow bolstered with oak, designed to spoil into enemy hulls with devastating force. However, ramming wasn't just about pace. It required specific timing and perspective. Hit too directly, and your very own deliver would possibly get caught or maybe capsize. Professional captains like those within the Athenian army perfected the artwork of the asterisk dikplus, pronounced dikplus, a maneuver that worried slipping via enemy strains, turning quick, and striking uncovered flanks. Above deck, the trireme carried a small contingent of Marines, normally around 10 to 20 heavily armed hoplites and some archers. Their function changed into to board enemy vessels or guard against boarding. But make no mistake, a trireme turned into now not a floating fort. It relied on agility, now not armor. One incorrect pass, and also you were kindling. What made the Athenian trireme fleet definitely modern wasn't just the deliver itself. It changed into the gadget at the back of it. Funded by means of the Theorica Asterisk, a public naval fund, Athens built and maintained loads of triremes. Citizens, even the poorest, served as rowers, creating a peculiar form of democracy at sea. While Athens beat the Persian fleet at Salamis in 480 B.C., it wasn't aristocrats who rode to victory. It changed into the not unusual human beings. Historical naval combat wasn't a cannon-blasting slugfest. It turned into greater, like excessive velocity chess, with the occasional avenue brawl. The primary goal: disable or sink the enemy earlier than they may do the same to you. And the main device for that, ramming. Ramming become the centerpiece of naval approaches in the trireme era. The goal changed into to pierce an enemy's hull below the waterline, the usage of the deliver's bronze-tipped prow. A nicely positioned ram could send a vessel to the backside in mins. But it wasn't as simple as price ahead. Timing, angle, and coordination mattered immensely. Too sharp an approach, and also you'd glance off. Too direct, and you might embed your ship in theirs, leaving both vessels inclined. To land a successful ram, fleets used complicated maneuvers just like the asterisk deekplus and asterisk periplus. In a asterisk deekplus, a ship could dart through gaps in the enemy line, then pivot to strike from in the back of. The asterisk periplus asterisk worried circling around the enemy formation to hit exposed flanks. Those weren't brute force procedures. They had been precision strikes depending on the rower's synchronization and the captain's foresight. But sometimes things did not move to devise. Rams missed. Ships locked collectively. Oars snapped. It truly is whilst Plan B got herein, boarding. Boarding turned the naval combat right into a land-style melee. As soon as ships collided or locked, Marines could bounce aboard the enemy vessel with swords, spears, and shields. These were not delicate affairs. Boarding turned into brutal, close-quarters combat, more like a gang brawl than an orderly phalanx. Archers and slingers introduced chaos from the top decks, selecting off all people who showed an excessive amount of helmet. Some fleets, like the ones of the Romans, eventually desired boarding over ramming. They even constructed unique devices like the asterisk corvus asterisk, a boarding plank with a spike that might hook onto enemy ships and turn sea battles into floating land fights. This tactic helped Rome defeat extra-skilled Carthaginian sailors at some point of the First Punic Warfare, because what Romans lacked in seamanship, they made up for in sheer infantry energy. Of course, this additionally meant naval battles have become even bloodier and greater chaotic. There was no retreat as soon as boarding started. It was kill or be killed on a deck slick with salt water, blood, and damaged timbers. If ramming became the scalpel of ancient naval conflict, then Hearth was its sledgehammer. There has been no greater terrifying sight, than a flaming deliver bearing down for your fleet. Fire ships were the Naval International's model of managed chaos, a weapon so risky that it regularly threatened the attacker as plenty as the enemy. Even though now not as common as triremes or boarding actions, hearth techniques emerged early and evolved over time. The primary principle became simple: load a deliver with flammable substances, pitch, tar, sulfur, resin, oil, and set it alight before sending it toward enemy vessels. Ideally, the fireplace deliver would go with the flow into tightly packed enemy strains, igniting sails, decks, and something else unfortunate enough to be flammable. One of the earliest documented makes use of fireplace ships comes from the Greco-Persian conflicts, where determined defenders tried to repel naval invasions via hurling flaming rafts or boats toward enemy galleys. Inside the confined areas of a harbor, or immediately wherein maneuverability became restricted, a single hearth ship could purpose mass panic and break formations. But hearth at sea was a double-edged sword. Winds could shift, flames should backfire. A poorly timed hearth deliver ought to destroy your own fleet, as without difficulty, because the enemy's. This is why hearth become frequently reserved for desperate moments, blockades, marvel attacks, or closing stands wherein the chance turned into clearly worth the havoc. The maximum sophisticated development in ancient incendiary war got here with Greek fire, a mysterious and fearsome weapon developed by the Byzantine Empire centuries later, but stimulated by using historic hearth processes. Greek hearth may want to allegedly burn on water and couldn't be extinguished with general strategies. Whilst it's more medieval than historic, its conceptual roots, chemical fireplace utilized in naval dominance, may be traced again to those early fire ships. Egyptian and Phoenician fleets extensively utilized variations of fire-primarily based guns, specifically in opposition to pirate vessels and in the course of sieges. For instance, coastal defenders might catapult fireplace pots or flaming arrows onto ships trying to breach harbors. The mental impact of fire at sea was unmatched. A ram can be blocked. A boarder will be repelled. However, hearth fire panicked crews, devoured timber hulls, and unfold faster than orders might be shouted. Even the maximum experienced sailors may abandon ship at the primary whiff of pitch and smoke. In the 5th century B.C., Athens converted itself from a landlocked city-state into a dominant naval superpower. And it all commenced with silver. While a huge silver vein became discovered in the mines of Laurium, Themistocles, and bold Athenian politician, convinced his fellow residents now not to divide the wealth but to make investments it. His plan, construct a fleet of triremes, masses of them. That selection changed records. With over 200 warships at its height, the Athenian navy have become the spine of what we now call the Athenian Empire. The town's power changed into no longer rooted in hoplite infantry or stone walls. It sailed on timber, sweat, and strategy. The victory at Salamis in 480 B. A sea league wherein Themistocles' fleet trapped and annihilated the Persian navy in Slender Straits, continues to be one of the maximum decisive sea battles of the historic global. That wind failed to just save Athens. It located it as the protector and shortly ruler of the Aegean. Under the Delian League, Athens began extracting tribute from allied metropolis states, supposedly for mutual naval protection. In exercise, this tribute was often used to fund Athens' own hobbies, from shipbuilding to public architecture. The Navy allowed Athens to put in force loyalty, suppress rebellions, and project its power a long way past its borders. However, it wasn't pretty much army might. The fleet democratized Athens. The poorest citizens who couldn't come up with the money for armor or land to combat, as hoplites became critical rowers within the triremes. Their contribution gave them political clout, remodeling the Athenian assembly and empowering the decrease instructions. Sea electricity became people's electricity. However, this dominance got here at a price. Athens's over-reliance on its navy and its coercive treatment of allies sowed resentment. All through the Peloponnesian War, Sparta, traditionally a land-based strength, constructed its own fleet with Persian money, and finally overwhelmed the Athenian army at Aegispotami in 405 B. A sea league. With its fleet gone, Athens became starved into give up. Still, the legacy of Athenian naval energy persisted. It showed that a town country with restrained land should emerge as an imperial pressure through mastery of the ocean. It additionally proved that ships may be political gear, just as a whole lot as weapons. If Athens dominated the Aegean, Carthage ruled the western Mediterranean. Based by means of Phoenician settlers around 800 B. A sea league. In what is now Tunisia, Carthage built its strength now not on conquest alone, however on trade, seafaring, and unrivaled naval innovation. With the aid of the 4th century B. A sea league, Carthage wasn't just a wealthy town. It was the nerve center of a sprawling maritime community that stretched from Spain to Sicily and North Africa to Sardinia. Carthaginian strength was made feasible by its fleet. Even as the Athenians refined the trireme, the Carthaginians took naval engineering to commercial levels. Their shipyards, especially the large round harbor of Carthage, could build and residence loads of warships. These were not theoretical numbers. Carthage had a meeting line fashion dock device that allowed for speedy production and repair, something unprecedented within the historic world. Carthaginian ships, frequently quadriremes or quinquiremes, were heavier than Athenian triremes, designed now not only for pace but for power. Their naval doctrine leaned in the direction of ramming and boarding, supported by using skilled mercenary marines and Libyan Phoenician sailors who had grown up on the sea. The town's maritime dominance wasn't most effective approximately pressure. It turned into about commerce. Carthaginian merchants navigated the Atlantic coasts of Europe and Africa, traded tin and silver, and brought lower back uncommon items. The army ensured that pirates, rival investors, or Roman goals did not intrude with this money-making glide. And then got here the Punic Wars. Rome, rising within the Italian peninsula, recognized that defeating Carthage meant constructing a military from scratch. After they captured a stranded Carthaginian quinquereme, they reverse-engineered it, complete with the asterisk Corvus asterisk, a boarding ramp that neutralized Carthage's superior seamanship with the aid of turning sea battles into land skirmishes. In spite of early defeats, Carthage held its personal via fantastic naval commanders and tactical mastery. Within the First Punic Warfare, the Carthaginians fought dozens of primary sea battles. At Drepana, they executed an ideal maneuver that destroyed a Roman fleet in spite of being outnumbered, proving Carthage still knew the way to command the ocean. However, amount eventually beaten first class. Roman patience, better deliver strains, and brutal area turned the tide. With the aid of the cease of the Second Punic Warfare, Carthage's fleet was long gone, its shipyards dismantled, and its power damaged. Still, the legend of Carthaginian naval dominance endures. They weren't just warriors at the water. They were grasp merchants, revolutionary shipbuilders, and formidable navigators who as soon as dominated the seas through wit, wealth, and wood. Whilst we think of ancient Egypt, we image pyramids, pharaohs, and temples, not fleets. However, Egypt became one of the earliest civilizations to embrace naval electricity, both on the Nile and at sea. Its ships were as famous as Greek triremes or Carthaginian quinqueremes. However, for hundreds of years, Egypt relied on watercraft to hold its empire, deliver troops, and shield its financial lifelines. The Nile became Egypt's dual carriageway, an artery that related north and south, wasteland and delta. As early as 3000 B.C., Egyptian ship developers have been crafting vessels from bundled papyrus reeds and later cedar wood imported from Lebanon. These riverboats transported grain, gold, soldiers, and even gigantic statues. Pharaohs led naval expeditions southward into Nubia and eastward across the Purple Sea to Punt, a mysterious land rich in incense, ivory, and wonderful animals. But Egypt's naval ambitions were not limited to the river. By the time of the New Kingdom, c. 1550–1070 B.C., Egypt developed seagoing fleets able to difficult pirates, repelling invasions, and projecting electricity beyond its borders. Under rulers like Thutmose III and Ramesses III, Egypt used warships in campaigns against the Sea Peoples, a confederation of raiders who threatened the Jap Mediterranean. Those battles, recorded in vibrant reliefs at Medinet Habu, display Egyptian archers firing from ships and marines conducting brutal close fight aboard narrow timber decks. Not like the strange triremes of Greece, Egyptian seafaring ships were broad, sail-driven vessels with confined maneuverability. They frequently featured raised fighting platforms and were crewed by archers, spearmen, and sailors trained in each combat and navigation. Their primary advantage changed into mobility along coasts and rivers, in which they might hastily set up soldiers or intercept service provider traffic. Egyptian naval strength additionally underpinned its economic system. Grain exports to the Levant and trade with the Aegean turned into secured by way of escort ships. Ports like Byblos and Tanis have become hubs of both commerce and naval logistics. Even foreign rulers sought Egyptian shipbuilders for their craftsmanship. In time, Egypt's naval strength waned underneath successive waves of overseas rule. Libyans, Assyrians, Persians, and finally Greeks and Romans. However, its lengthy legacy of riverine and coastal battle set the muse for naval traditions within the historic close East. Egypt's ships may not have dominated the open sea, but they dominated the rhythm of empire, sailing in which the Nile flowed, where the winds allowed, and where energy demanded. Whilst the Roman Republic first rose to prominence, it turned into not a naval strength. Rome's energy lay in its disciplined legions and road-building prowess, not shipbuilding. But that changed dramatically and rapidly, whilst the Republic discovered itself in a bitter contest for manage of the Mediterranean against Carthage. The result changed into one of the maximum dramatic naval modification in historic history. On the begin of the First Punic War, 264 B.C., Rome had nearly no fleet. Carthage, in the meantime, had centuries of maritime dominance. But the Romans were not deterred. In keeping with legend, they captured a stranded Carthaginian quinquereme and used it as a prototype. Within months, they mass-produced a military, assembling hundreds of ships through sheer manpower and nation-stage enterprise. But Rome knew it couldn't outsail the Carthaginians. So it changed the rules of the game. Input the *corvus*, a boarding bridge outfitted with a metallic spike. This device grew to become sea battles into infantry brawls, Rome's distinctiveness. With it, Roman Marines may want to board enemy ships en masse, remodeling naval combat into something some distance greater acquainted to Roman soldiers. The results had been dramatic. In battles like Mylae and Cape Ecnomus, Rome's fantastically inexperienced sailors defeated veteran Carthaginian crews through sheer aggression and the effectiveness of the *corvus*. Eventually, the corvus turned into deserted. It made ships dangerously top-heavy. However, it had already grew to become the tide of the conflict. With the aid of the Second Punic War, Rome's naval infrastructure had matured. Its fleets patrolled the western Mediterranean, blanketed supply lines to Iberia and Africa, and disrupted Hannibal's potential to reinforce his forces from Carthage. Naval blockades and amphibious landings have become popular tactics. Under the Empire, Roman control of the seas extended similarly. The classis Missenensis and classis Ravennatis have been of the principal imperial fleets stationed to protect alternate routes, suppress piracy, and transport troops. Even though not usually at the forefront of struggle, the military furnished important logistical and strategic guide, retaining the empire interconnected. Unlike Athens or Carthage, Rome didn't build a maritime identity. It used the sea as a tool, something to be mastered whilst necessary. And yet, by way of the primary century sea, lead, the mare nostrum, our sea, turned into greater than a boast. It turned into reality. Rome may additionally had been born on land, but its destiny turned into sealed on water. Through model, innovation, and constant will, it turned the ocean from a vulnerability right into a citadel. Historic naval battle didn't just impact battles. It shaped borders, economies, empires, and even cultures. Across the Mediterranean and past, control of the ocean meant extra than victory on the water. It intended to have an effect on over the motion of ideas, alternate languages, and strength systems that might echo for hundreds of years. First, bear in mind how navies solid empires. Athens have become a cultural and monetary powerhouse because of its naval power. Carthage became maritime mastery, right into a mercantile empire. Rome, no matter its past do begin at sea, used naval superiority to govern the entire Mediterranean basin. Each of these powers had land armies. However, it was their fleets that let them strike across continents, shield distant territories, and choke enemy economies. The ocean additionally served as a cultural conduit. Greek colonists traveled through Deliver to establish outposts across Italy and Asia Minor, spreading artwork, faith, and language. Egyptian ships brought papyrus, gold, and sacred understanding to foreign courts. Phoenician mariners transmitted their alphabet and their gods to almost every shore they touched. Naval power turned into, in no way, just martial. It changed into civilizational. Technologically, ancient navies driven Deliver constructing to new heights. The development of the trireme and later large polyremes asterisk became not simply military development. It turned into a revolution in engineering. Harbors have become logistical hubs. Navigation techniques improved. Standardized Deliver designs laid the foundation for maritime structure, still seen in later Byzantine and Islamic navies. Even monetary structures evolved due to navies. Included sea routes allowed for stable change across vast distances, allowing luxury items like silks, spices, wine, and tin to transport between a long way-flung cultures. Cities with robust fleets like Alexandria or Rhodes have become wealthy cosmopolitan facilities, wherein fleets thrived. So did markets, artists, pupils, and revolutionaries. After which there was the psychological legacy. Hearth ships, ramming methods, boarding movements. These left lasting impression on how war changed into imagined. They delivered the concept that the sea itself could be a weapon, that mobility and control, as opposed to just brute pressure, may want to win wars. These days, we keep in mind many of those empires for his or her land conquests. But their sea conquests were just as important and frequently more enduring. Historic naval warfare wasn't just about who had the fastest deliver or the sharpest ram. It turned into about who understood the sea as a stage, now not only for struggle, but for history itself. In the long run, the triremes may be gone, however their wake nevertheless ripples through time. Cyrus the Great became born around 600 BC in the region of Anshan, then a vassal state beneath Median rule. His own family, the Achaemenids, claimed noble descent and ruled a small, however respected Persian domain. But not anything about Cyrus's formative years hinted that he could in the future create one in all the most important empires the world had ever seen. And yet from the very beginning, legends surrounded him. Greek historian Herodotus gives us one of the most dramatic origin stories in historic biography. According to Herodotus, King Astyages of Media, Cyrus's grandfather, had a dream that his daughter's son could overthrow him. Interpreters confirmed his worst fear: the kid might be a threat to his throne. So Astyages married his daughter Manding to a Persian noble, Cambyses I, hoping the toddler might stay politically insignificant. But the dreams persevered. Whilst Cyrus became born, Astyages took no probabilities. He ordered a devoted servant, Harpagus, to kill the kid. Harpagus, reluctant to commit such an act, delegated the grotesque mission to a shepherd. But instead of forsaking the infant, the shepherd raised Cyrus as his own, hiding him in the mountains and treating him like a common herder's son. As Cyrus grew, so did his aura. Whilst a boy, he stood out, commanding other children, displaying leadership beyond his years. Eventually, rumors reached the court, a noble child dwelling as a shepherd. Astyages investigated, and the truth unraveled. Exceptionally, he spared Cyrus, perhaps seeing no threat or perhaps haunted by using guilt. Harpagus, however, became now not so lucky. In a grim punishment, Astyages killed Harpagus' son and served him as a meal at court. Meanwhile, Cyrus becomes sent again to Persia to stay below his father Cambyses' care, now identified openly as a prince of noble blood. What the Median king did not know become that he had just ensured his personal downfall. For Cyrus's time amongst shepherds and nobles alike gave him a unique understanding of humans, both the powerful and the standard. Whether or not Herodotus' version is fact or delusion, the tale captures the air of mystery that could continually surround Cyrus. From near demise in infancy to destiny-defying survival, his adolescence planted the seeds of greatness. He could now not only challenge Astyages, but redefine kingship itself. By means of the mid-6th century BC, Cyrus was not just a Persian prince. He became a calculating and bold chief, poised to venture the regional popularity quo. At that time, the Median Empire, dominated through King Astyages, still held sway over Persia. But the balance of electricity was shifting, and Cyrus was equipped to tip the scales. The catalyst turned into betrayal. According to a couple of resources, which include Herodotus and the Babylonian Chronicle, The Median trendy Harpagus, the very guy ordered years earlier to kill infant Cyrus, had never forgotten the merciless destiny of his son. Now years later, he became in a function to act. Secretly, he dispatched messages to Cyrus, encouraging him to rise up and promising help from inside the Median ranks. It was the start of a riot that might shake the historic world. Around 553 B.C., Cyrus officially rebelled. Persia, as soon as a subordinate nation, now declared independence and battle. What followed was now not a single decisive conflict, however a series of prolonged campaigns. Over 3 years, Cyrus's forces pushed deeper into Median territory, drawing help from disaffected nobles and nearby allies. His reputation grew no longer just for military competence, but for restraint. He regularly spared the lives of surrendered enemies, earning both fear and admiration. Meanwhile, Astyages' court docket became unraveling. Loyalty eroded when the final war of words came around 550 B.C. It wasn't the Medes who triumphed. It turned into Cyrus. Astyages changed into betrayed via his personal military, and the once powerful Median Empire crumbled almost overnight. Cyrus entered Ecbatana, the Median capital, not as a barbarian conqueror, but as a brand new type of ruler. He respected local traditions, preserved Median administrative systems, and incorporated many Medes into his developing government. This coverage of inclusion might come to be a trademark of his rule. With Media under his manipulate, Cyrus unified the Iranian plateau. But this wasn't the stop. It turned into the beginning. By way of overthrowing the Medes, he no longer only liberated Persia from vassalage, but additionally inherited their empire. He now dominated lands stretching from present-day Iran to components of Central Asia. Fresh from his overcome the Medes, Cyrus the extremely good grew to become his gaze westward, in the direction of the fabulously rich state of Lydia, dominated by the mythical Croesus. Croesus was no regular king. He became one of the richest guys of his time, his name becoming a byword for immense wealth. His capital Sardis gleamed with luxury, and his armies had been properly ready with cavalry and pro-troops. However, Croesus made a fatal mistake. He underestimated Cyrus. In search of to preempt Persian enlargement, Croesus shaped alliances with Egypt and Babylon and consulted the Oracle of Delphi. The oracle famously informed him that if he crossed the river to attack Persia, he would destroy a remarkable empire. Encouraged, Croesus launched an invasion only to discover that the empire he might destroy was his personal. The two forces clashed close to the Halys River in 547 B.C. After a fiercely contested battle, Croesus withdrew to Sardis, believing the marketing campaign season had ended and that he may want to regroup inside the spring with allied reinforcements. But Cyrus did something unexpected. He pursued. In an ambitious wintry weather campaign, Cyrus besieged Sardis, forcing Croesus right into a determined defense. In keeping with Herodotus, Cyrus even employed a tactical marvel. He used camels to startle the Lydian cavalry, Croesus' most powerful asset, rendering them ineffective. Inside weeks, Sardis fell. Croesus became captured alive. What happened subsequent sealed Cyrus's recognition as a ruler unlike another. Rather than executing Croesus, Cyrus reportedly spared him, even making him an advisor. The story goes that as Croesus changed into approximately to be burned alive, he cried out Solon's name, a Greek philosopher who once warned him now not to matter a person lucky until he knew how his existence ended. Cyrus, moved by using the story and the awareness in it, ordered the fire extinguished. Whether fantasy or truth, this narrative displays Cyrus's recognized policy of clemency. With Lydia conquered, Cyrus won control over its sizable treasury and trade networks at the side of the effective Greek city-states of Ionia, along the Aegean coast. Although the Ionian cities resisted Persian rule, they were no match for Cyrus's increasing military and diplomatic gadget. The autumn of Croesus marked extra than the collapse of a wealthy country. It showed Cyrus's tactical brilliance and willingness to use both conflict and mercy. It also gave Persia a foothold inside the Greek global, setting the degree for future East-West conflicts. And for Cyrus, it became just the subsequent step in a hastily increasing empire. By means of the overdue 540s B.C. lead, most effective one principal strength remained among Cyrus and undisputed dominance of the Near East, Babylon. Once ruled by kings like Hammurabi and Nebuchadnezzar II, Babylon had grown right into a remarkable town famed for its towering ziggurats, large double walls, and the fabled hanging gardens. But below the grandeur, cracks have been forming. On the time, Babylon changed into dominated by way of Nabonidus, a king deeply unpopular with his personal humans. His non-secular policies alienated the powerful priesthood of Marduk, the city's chief deity. He had spent years far from Babylon, leaving the empire in the palms of his son, Belshazzar, a name acquainted to readers of the Hebrew Bible. Discontent turned into developing. Cyrus sensed opportunity. In 539 B.C. lead, Cyrus launched his marketing campaign, but not like previous invasions marked by means of siege and destruction. This one became surgical. Cyrus's forces defeated Babylonian troops at Opis, a key town on the Tigris. There they received now not simplest with navy strength, but with propaganda. The Persians promised to free up the human beings from the misrule of Nabonidus, imparting Cyrus as a restorer of divine order. The most impressive part, when Cyrus entered Babylon, he did so without a combat. According to the Nabonidus Chronicle and later Greek resources, the metropolis gates have been opened to him, possibly through political negotiation, possibly due to inner betrayal. Regardless, Cyrus marched into Babylon as a liberator, no longer a conqueror. He respected the city's temples, participated in religious ceremonies, and declared within the well-known Cyrus Cylinder that he had been chosen by Marduk himself to repair peace and justice. This document, regularly known as the world's first charter of human rights, records Cyrus's rules of tolerance, temple recovery, and repatriation of displaced peoples. Among those affected have been the Jews exiled from Jerusalem a long time earlier by way of Babylonian kings. Cyrus issued an edict permitting them to go back home and rebuild the temple in Jerusalem, an act so extensive that the Hebrew Bible refers to him as God's anointed, a title otherwise reserved for Israelite kings. After entering Babylon in 539 B.C., Cyrus the Terrific didn't just take the throne, he rewrote the rules of empire. One of the most top-notch artifacts of his reign is the Cyrus Cylinder, a clay report inscribed in Akkadian cuneiform, frequently hailed as the arena's first charter of human rights. At the same time as present-day students debate that claim, there may be absolute nobody doubt that the cylinder offers a revolutionary glimpse into how Cyrus saw strength, not as domination, however, as stewardship. Inside the text, Cyrus publicizes himself chosen by Marduk, Babylon's chief deity, to repair order and justice after the misrule of Nabonidus. But this wasn't mere flattery. Cyrus backed his words with motion. He restored temples to their right characteristic, allowed displaced peoples to go back to their homelands, and explicitly said that he would not oppress his subjects or regulate their neighborhood traditions. One of the most well-known consequences of this coverage became the liberation of the Jews from Babylonian exile. After many years in captivity, the Jewish people were allowed to go back to Jerusalem and rebuild their destroyed temple. The e-book of Ezra inside the Hebrew Bible information Cyrus's decree, praising him as a device of divine will, notable for a foreign king. In fact, Cyrus is the most effective non-Jew noted within the Bible as a Messiah, or anointed one. The Cyrus Cylinder speaks in terms of freedom, recovery, and legitimacy through justice, a hanging contrast to the usual rhetoric of ancient rulers who regularly glorified conquest and divine punishment. Rather than boasting about destroying towns or enslaving enemies, Cyrus highlights his role as a protector of various cultures and faiths. This wasn't weak spot. It was method. By way of respecting local customs, he prevented riot and fostered loyalty across his great empire. Although we ought to be careful now not to project present-day legal ideas onto historical texts, the spirit of the Cyrus Cylinder remains extraordinary. It envisions a global wherein rulers derive legitimacy, now not from fear, however from benevolence and inclusion. Today, a replica of the cylinder is displayed at the United Countries headquarters, a testament to its symbolic weight as an early blueprint for pluralistic governance. Cyrus the Splendid did not just conquer a great empire. He held it together. That might sound simple on paper, however in truth, He ruled over an exceptionally diverse international: Persians, Medes, Babylonians, Elamites, Lydians, Hebrews, and limitless others, all with their personal languages, gods, customs, and grievances. What made Cyrus genuinely awesome become now not how a ways he prolonged his borders, but how skillfully he managed what lay inside them. At the middle of Cyrus's governance became a philosophy of tolerance through structure. Unlike many historic rulers who imposed their culture and faith upon conquered peoples, Cyrus embraced a decentralized version. He allowed neighborhood leaders to stay in area, nearby religions to flourish, and local customs to continue. As opposed to crush his subjects into submission, he sought to win their trust. And it labored. He retained and adapted the executive structures of the Medes and Babylonians, blending them with Persian practices to create a uniquely bendy empire. Strength changed into delegated to satraps or provincial governors, who oversaw taxation, protection, and justice of their areas. Those officers have been commonly selected from local elites, but remained accountable to Cyrus's valuable authority. This gadget have become the foundation of Achaemenid rule for generations. Cyrus also invested in infrastructure. He developed change routes, safeguarded caravans, and ensured fair treatment for merchants. Knowing that trade became as vital to stability as armies, his empire wasn't only a military tool. It was a monetary and cultural network that stretched from the Indus Valley to the Aegean Sea. He additionally understood the strength of symbolism. In every metropolis he conquered, Cyrus made gestures of appreciation, restoring temples, collaborating in religious ceremonies, and maintaining nearby establishments. Those acts weren't actually theatrical. They had been diplomatic strategies that earned him the loyalty of former enemies. Most excellent changed into how little resistance his rule provoked. Cyrus did not just avoid rebellions. He regularly inspired admiration. Even the Greeks, normally disdainful of barbarians, considered him as a smart and just king. Xenophon, the Athenian historian, might later write Cyropedia*, a partially fictionalized but deeply admiring biography of Cyrus, presenting him as the model of enlightened management. By means of the end of his reign, Cyrus the Remarkable had reshaped the ancient international. From the Aegean Sea to the mountains of Central Asia, his empire stretched farther than any before it. However, like many extraordinary conquerors, his ambition driven him closer to one final marketing campaign, this time into the steppes of the Northeast. It might be his last. Round 530 B.C. Lead. Cyrus set out to confront the Massagetae, a confederation of nomadic tribes dwelling east of the Caspian Sea. Those fierce horse-riding warriors have been led with the aid of Queen Tomyris, a ruler remembered as both a military chief and an image of defiance. Her human beings were seen by Persians as univilized but risky, a danger to the empire's expanding borders. The information of the campaign are murky, shaped in large part with the aid of Herodotus' dramatic and likely decorated account. In keeping with the Greek historian, Cyrus first tried international relations, offering marriage to Queen Tomyris. She saw it for what it was, a political ploy. While diplomacy failed, Cyrus resorted to trickery. He left in the back of a banquet of wine and wealthy food, understanding the Massagetae were unaccustomed to alcohol. After a drunken party, lots of her warriors had been ambushed and slaughtered, which includes her son. Devastated and enraged, Tomyris swore vengeance. In the climactic conflict that followed, the Massagetae beaten the Persian forces. Cyrus turned into killed in combat. Herodotus even claims that Tomyris had his body decapitated and positioned his severed head in a pores and skin packed with blood, affirming, "Drink your fill of blood, you who thirsted for it." At the same time as the grotesque finishing can be more fable than reality, what is positive is that Cyrus died all through this marketing campaign, a ways from the awesome cities he had conquered. His body was ultimately back to Pasargadae, the capital he based in Persia, and buried in a modest yet dignified tomb, nonetheless status today as a testament to his legacy. His dying marked the end of technology. The throne passed to his son, Cambyses II, who could hold the empire's expansion, notably into Egypt. But Cyrus's precise combination of tolerance, method, and visionary leadership could not be easily replicated. When Cyrus the Tremendous died, he left at the back of greater than a vast empire. He left behind a political blueprint, a philosophical precedent, and a recognition so respected that even centuries later, his name stimulated awe. The Achaemenid Empire, based by means of Cyrus, turned into the biggest the sector had ever seen to that factor, stretching from the Aegean to the Indus. However, it wasn't just length that mattered. It turned into the way it functioned. Cyrus's policies of inclusion, tolerance, and administrative innovation persevered below his successors. His son Cambyses II, and later Darius the Great, did not just expand the empire. They formalized its shape. The satrapy machine Cyrus pioneered have become a cornerstone of imperial governance. Those nearby governors maintained regulation and order, accrued taxes, and spoke back at once to the king, allowing the empire to remain both significant and surprisingly green. Non-secular and cultural freedom remained professional coverage. Temples and nearby deities had been respected across the empire, from Babylonian ziggurats to Egyptian sanctuaries. Nearby elites were frequently kept in electricity below Persian oversight, and rebellions have been uncommon within the early Achaemenid years, not due to fear, but due to the fact many subjects discovered Persian rule less oppressive than the regimes they'd previously endured. Cyrus also helped to set up the concept of kingship as a moral function, now not only a political one. He wasn't merely king of Persia. He took on titles like King of the Four Corners of the World. However, in contrast to the boastful tyrants of the past, his legitimacy became tied to the nicely being of his subjects. This wasn't just propaganda. It meditated a real shift in imperial philosophy. Right governance became a part of greatness. Even in dying, Cyrus's have an effect on changed into felt. His tomb at Pasargadae, a simple limestone shape, stood as an image of humility and permanence. Alexander the Excellent, himself a grasp of empire centuries later, visited Cyrus's tomb and reportedly paid it homage, ordering its recovery after it was desecrated. In Persia, Cyrus became not just remembered, he turned into respected. Later Persian dynasties would invoke his legacy to legitimize their own rule. Zoroastrian monks connected him with divine justice, and Iranian country-wide identification continues to have fun him as the daddy of the nation. Cyrus the top notches have an effect on didn't quit along with his dying, or even with the autumn of his empire. Over the centuries, his legacy grew beyond borders, faiths, and cultures, cementing him not just as a Persian hero, but as a globally sought-after discern whose example echoed through time. Within the Hebrew Bible, Cyrus is described not as a pagan tyrant, but as a divinely appointed liberator. The book of Isaiah refers to him because the anointed of the Lord, a title in any other case reserved for Israelite kings. His decree allowing the Jews to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple marked a turning point in Jewish history. For many, he stays a righteous Gentile, an extraordinary example of a powerful ruler who used his might to restore, not break, faith and freedom. In Greece, no matter centuries of battle with Persia, Cyrus turned into frequently portrayed as the model monarch. The Athenian creator Xenophon, a student of Socrates, wrote the Cyropedia asterisk, a partly fictionalized account of Cyrus's existence that supplied him as the precise ruler. Clever, simply, slight and courageous. Even though no longer a strict historical biography, it fashioned Hellenistic and Roman idea about management and ethics for centuries to return. In Islamic subculture, some students and commentators have recognized Cyrus with *Dhul Qarnayn, the two-horned one, mentioned within the Quran, a righteous king who constructed a great wall to shield human beings from chaos and injustice. Even as this identification is debated, it displays the honor Cyrus commands across Abrahamic traditions. Cutting-edge historians and political leaders have also appeared to Cyrus for thought. In 1776, Thomas Jefferson reportedly kept a copy of the Cyropedia at his bedside. In the 20th century, Iran's closing Shah invoked Cyrus as a symbol of country-wide harmony and reform. And these days, Cyrus's Cyrus Cylinder, regularly dubbed the arena's first statement of human rights, is displayed at the United Countries as a symbol of tolerance and governance. Cyrus's enchantment transcends conquest. He's remembered now not for cruelty or empire constructing alone, but for his uncommon capability to wield strength with justice. He showed that an empire didn't must crush difference to keep control, and that rulers may want to win loyalty through recognize, now not fear. Extra than millennia later, Cyrus the High Quality remains a paradox. A conqueror celebrated for his compassion, a king praised via those he conquered. Few figures and records command such huge admiration, and less still deserve it as lots. Within the blistering sun of the Nile Valley, the ancient Egyptians made a formidable preference. Lots of them shaved their heads. But this wasn't a sensible decision alone. It was a symbol, a statement, a smooth canvas. And upon that canvas, they placed some of the most elaborate wigs the historic global ever noticed. Wigs in historic Egypt weren't simply stylish. They were critical markers of identity, repute, and purity. Ladies and men of high rank did not just put on them. They flaunted them. Those weren't simple accessories either. They might be product of actual human hair, imported horsehair, or finely woven plant fibers. Rich elites often commissioned wigs with more than one layers, tricky braiding, gold beads, and even perfumed cones placed atop them. Wax-based totally scents that would soften slowly in the sun, masking them in luxurious. For girls, hairstyles have been tied to femininity, fertility, and energy. A noble woman's wig might be embellished with floral decorations, colorful bands, or valuable steel clasps. A priestess may wear hers in tight symmetrical rows, echoing the divine order of the gods. For guys, specifically those in service to Pharaoh, a thick stylized wig reflected now not simply wealth, however closeness to the divine hierarchy. Children, however, had their own style. Many wore the sidelock of youth, a shaved head with one ornate braid left dangling, an image of adolescence that would be cut off for the duration of adulthood, or non-secular rites of passage. After which there had been the ambitious priests. In sharp contrast to the extravagance of courtroom wigs, monks had been required to shave their whole bodies, inclusive of their heads, to preserve ritual purity. In public ceremonies, though, even they could put on ceremonial wigs, symbolizing their non-secular roles extra than their man or woman identification. What is more charming is how wigs even served after dying. Mummies were regularly buried with wigs in vicinity, making sure their fame and splendor carried into the afterlife. Hair, in different phrases, wasn't just arrogance. It became an eternal identity. In case you photograph a Viking, you likely consider wild beards and braided hair, an image solid from identical components archaeology, Norse sagas, and Hollywood. But there's a shocking reality in that vision. Viking hairstyles were some distance from random. In truth, hair turned into a powerful symbol in Norse society of identification, masculinity, clan loyalty, and even seduction. Each Viking women and men took their hair seriously. In an international wherein bodily appearance projected power and honor, lengthy hair wasn't a vanity. It became an announcement. Guys frequently grew their hair lengthy and styled it meticulously. Braids, pinnacle knots, and half-shaved heads were not just stylish. They were intimidating. A warrior on foot into conflict with braided locks, and a thick beard wasn't just practical, keeping hair out of the eyes. He changed into broadcasting his readiness to combat and his resistance to worry. For Viking ladies, hair might be just as symbolic. Long, properly groomed hair changed into a marker of femininity and excessive repute. Ladies regularly braided their hair in complicated styles. Now and again, the usage of ribbons or beads woven into the strands. A married lady might put on her hair wrapped or partly, included to signal her marital reputation, much like how wedding rings work these days. A few burial websites in Scandinavia even include combs, hair pins, and grooming gear, suggesting everyday care and pride in look have been essential to each sexes. There was additionally a charming prison angle. In Viking law codes, hair performed a position in justice. Slicing off a person's hair without permission became taken into consideration a grave insult, one that might cause revenge, criminal retribution, or complete blown blood feuds. This is because hair represented honor. To shame a warrior through slicing his locks turned into to attack his social standing itself. After which there is mythology. The Norse gods themselves had iconic hair. Thor along with his flaming purple beard. Loki's transformation tricks regularly concerned adjustments in hair or form. And of course, the goddess Sif, whose golden hair was so legendary that when Loki cut it off as a prank, he had to beg the dwarves to forge a magical substitute from actual gold. Hair wasn't just mortal identity. It was divine foreign money. The Romans knew a factor or about control, and that prolonged to their hairstyles. In a global where politics, magnificence, and gender have been all tightly regulated, hair have become one of the subtlest but most effective equipment of social navigation, especially in elite circles. Your locks could literally declare your allegiance, your values, and your ambition. Allows begin with Roman guys. Within the early republic, an appropriate Roman citizen was clean-cut, conservative, and sensible. Hair was quick, tidy, and properly groomed. Something longer than that become considered suspect, effeminate, foreign, or lazy. A brief haircut and a clean-shaven face weren't just style alternatives. They were civic statements. They said, I am disciplined. I serve the nation. I'm Roman. But because the empire developed, things were given fluffier. Emperors like Nero and Commodus permit their curls develop out in flamboyant patterns that mimicked Greek philosophers or maybe divine statues. A few sported what we now call the Roman pinnacle knot, a raised section of curled or piled hair at the front, sculpted to signify mind, teenagers, or refinement. Those weren't accidents. They were carefully crafted public photos. Hair became propaganda. For Roman girls, the stakes were even better. Hairstyles have become nearly architectural. The famous Flavian Tower fashion, a literal mountain of curls and braids pinned above the pinnacle, turned into a high-status appearance made feasible simplest by using slave labor, hot irons, and hours of work. The extra complicated the hairdo, The wealthier the girl, as it meant she had the entertainment time and servants to preserve it. Hair could also display political loyalty. Empresses frequently debuted new styles in statues and coinage, which have been then copied by means of top elegance girls across the empire. Sporting a hair, do just like the empress, wasn't simply flattery, it was allegiance. Meanwhile, enslaved humans were regularly forced to keep their hair short or plain, denying them this form of expression absolutely. Soldiers likewise wore sensible cuts, reinforcing unity and function over flair. After which there had been the rebels. Some Romans deliberately grew lengthy hair or adopted barbarian styles to reveal disdain for imperial values. For example, gladiators frequently wore dramatic hairstyles to construct degree personas. Component athlete, part celeb, element threat. In historical Japan, hair wasn't just a personal characteristic. It changed into an emblem of field, responsibility, and deeply rooted lifestyle. Nowhere changed into this more visible than within the iconic Chanmage asterisk, the extraordinary top not worn by means of samurai. This wasn't just a haircut. It was a cultural agreement. Originally, the Chanmage started out as a sensible desire. The shaved crown kept helmets, in particular the kabuto. Samurai wore helmets, more relaxed and at ease in war. However, over the years, as peace settled in across the Edo period, the style have become much less about fight and extra about identity. The pinnacle knot have become an inflexible image of warrior fame, honor, and submission to Bushido, the way of the warrior. Cutting it off wasn't only a haircut. It became symbolic loss of life. The disgraced samurai might be ordered to get rid of his pinnacle knot, or do it himself as a signal that he became not worth of his rank. In intense instances, the reducing of the top knot preceded seppuku asterisk, the ritual suicide performed to compensate for disgrace. The hair of Eastern women also conveyed effective social messages. At some point of the Heian period, 794–1185, noble women grew their hair particularly lengthy, on occasion longer than there are bodies, and allowed it to cascade immediately down their backs in a style called subarakashi. This wasn't just splendor. It changed into elegance, patience, and standing. Retaining such duration required titanic care, time, and wealth, trends specific to nobility. Later, for the duration of the Edo period, girls' hairstyles became an increasing number of ornate and stylized. Patterns just like the shimada, a sort of coiled bun, had been decorated with pins, combs, and decorations. Everyone coded with that means. Sure patterns indicated marital repute, age, or maybe career. Courtesans and geisha for instance, used remarkable and problematic hairstyles no longer most effective to draw clients, however to signal their education degree and experience degree. Hair may also be a form of rebellion. At some point of shogunate regulations, laws were exceeded limiting hairstyles based on elegance. Violating those codes, even by letting your hair grow the wrong manner, could draw suspicion or punishment. And yet, artists, actors, or even Ronin asterisk, masterless samurai, regularly bent the policies to make bold statements approximately identity and resistance. In historical Japan, hair turned into bound actually and figuratively by duty, devotion, and drama. Whether or not in the silent dignity of a samurai or the stylish swirl atop a geisha's head, coiffures had been acts of storytelling, honor, and deep cultural memory. Across ancient Africa, hair wasn't just a private style. It became a language. From the elaborate cornrows of the Sahel to the towering coils of the Hausa, hairstyles served as identification cards, non-secular expressions, or even survival gear. Long earlier than colonial disruption, African hair way of life became a wealthy tapestry of symbolism, craftsmanship, and resistance. Permits start in ancient Egypt's southern neighbor, Nubia. Nubian groups, regularly unfairly eclipsed in mainstream records, developed stylized braids and twists that communicated reputation, age, and clan. Nubian queens like Ameneter and Amenishakito wore complicated braided wigs and headpieces that rivaled even Egyptian royalty, asserting their power and splendor in bold, unmistakable phrases. Similarly west, in what's now Nigeria, the Yoruba and Igbo peoples have been already treating hair as a creative medium. Complicated patterns were not just for show. They have been cautiously planned with sure styles reserved for brides, warriors, or religious initiates. Hairdressers were quite respected, almost priest-like of their roles. To entrust someone with your hair became to believe them together with your essence. A few of the Himba human beings of Namibia, crimson ochre paste, crafted from powdered stone and butter fat, is still used nowadays to coat and sculpt difficult braids. Those ochre patterns do not just protect hair from the barren region weather. They symbolize the whole thing from puberty to marital fame. For Himba ladies, hair is literally shaped by means of the seasons of life. However, perhaps the most charming element of African hair records lies in how it encoded resistance. At some point of the transatlantic slave change, enslaved Africans used hairstyles as silent kinds of revolt and remembrance. Cornrows weren't simply realistic. They were maps. Some styles symbolized getaway routes or secure meeting points. Others preserved ancestral styles from again home, defying erasure with each twist and braid. In lots of West African cultures, shaved heads marked mourning or spiritual transitions. Whilst thick dreadlocks may want to represent electricity, connection to the divine, or warriorhood, hair was sacred, in no way just aesthetic. Colonialism might later stigmatize these hairstyles, pushing Eurocentric ideals of splendor. However, the ancient roots of African hair way of life have been in no way fully erased. They lived on in memory, in hands, in braids passed from mother to daughter, and are now being reclaimed round the world. In historical Greece, in which marble statues and epics fashioned the Western imagination, hair wasn't only a count number of private grooming. It was a public performance of distinctive feature, mind, and civilization. From the tight curls of Athenian youths to the flowing locks of philosophers, hair helped define who you had been in the eyes of both the gods and your fellow citizens. Let's begin with the men. Early on, Greek men frequently wore lengthy hair tied again with ribbons or bands. Homeric heroes like Achilles and Odysseus are described in epic verse as having flowing or shining hair, symbolizing power, nobility, and divine want. In these early periods, lengthy hair became masculine and heroic. But through the classical generation, matters had changed. A properly groomed, fairly brief haircut have become the new best for Athenian guys. The beard, however, stayed. It became the combination of preference for philosophers, statesmen, and instructors. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle all bearded. The beard was associated with wisdom and adulthood, even as the clean brow and exposed face conveyed openness and reason. A long beard without long wild hair suggested intellect over impulse, good judgment over emotion. In evaluation, slaves and foreigners have been on occasion pressured to shave their heads as a mark of submission or inferiority. So in an atypical twist, having hair, as a minimum the proper kind, was a political privilege. Women's hair, on the other hand, changed into deeply tied to domestic virtue. In public, respectable ladies were anticipated to put on their hair up and included, braided or coiled into buns. Hair putting unfastened was frequently reserved for specific rituals, specifically mourning or ecstatic religious practices, just like the Dionysian cults, where unbound hair symbolized a break from order and social norms. Girls wore their hair down till puberty, after which their first braid was frequently reduced and committed to Artemis as a part of a coming-of-age ritual. This act symbolized both the give-up of childhood and the beginning of societal responsibility. Greek goddesses also had signature hair. Athena's well-arranged war helmet style symbolized method and field. Aphrodite's flowing curls represented sensuality and divine beauty. Hairstyles helped mortals align with deities, borrowing divine traits by way of mimicking their forms. In historical China, hair became inseparable from ethical philosophy, own family obligation, and imperial manage. From the smooth top knots of Confucian scholars to the ornate buns of Tang Dynasty court docket girls, each strand served a reason, both aesthetic and symbolic. Hair became not to be altered gently. In truth, slicing it turned into regularly considered a grave offense. Why? Due to Confucian filial piety. One of the center tenets of Confucianism turned into that your body, hair included, became a sacred gift out of your mother and father. To cut, harm, or otherwise trade it unnecessarily turned into a signal of disrespect. This belief permeated Chinese society for hundreds of years. Even criminals confronted hair shaving now not simply as a punishment, but as a ritual humiliation and religious severance. Men normally wore their hair lengthy and tied it into a top knot or bun. Students, poets, and officers would often pair this with lengthy gowns and caps, signifying know-how, composure, and loyalty to reserve. To look a man with unfastened or unkempt hair in public changed into deeply unsettling. It implied madness, mourning, or rise up. For girl, hairstyles were highly age and standing established. Young girls frequently wore twin buns or side ponytails, patterns that marked them as unmarried. Upon marriage, a woman's hair could be restyled right into an extra mature and formal arrangement. Regularly, a unmarried coil or bun pinned with combs, jade ornaments, or gold hair sticks. Court docket ladies and empresses for the duration of the Tang dynasty took matters to magnificent heights, literally. Their hair changed into sculpted into towering arrangements adorned with phoenix pins, flowers, and silk. There was additionally politics in hair. Dynastic shifts regularly introduced forced modifications in appearance. When the Manchu-led Qing dynasty conquered Ming China, they enforced the asterisk Q hairstyle, the front of the pinnacle shaved with the rest braided into a long pigtail. This style became a hated symbol of submission to foreign rule. Many Han Chinese resisted, choosing demise over what they saw as a betrayal of cultural identification. In contrast, Taoist monks shaved their heads absolutely to reject worldly attachments. Buddhist clergymen did the identical, demonstrating their detachment from the fabric realm and their include of impermanence. In historical India, hair wasn't only a physical feature. It turned into sacred. It intertwined with ritual purity, solid identification, and spiritual symbolism, becoming an effective medium of each devotion and social manipulate. From the twisted dreadlocks of sages to the shaved heads of pilgrims, hair in Indian way of life advised complex testimonies of belief, field, and transformation. Let's begin with the sadhus, wandering holy men, who renounced worldly life. Their hair became by no means reduced, combed, or limited. As an alternative, they let it develop into thick, disheveled dreadlocks known as asterisk jata. Those locks symbolized their non-secular power and detachment from cloth worries. The longer and wilder the hair, the more potent the message. This character had transcended arrogance, circle of relatives, and even identity. Sadhus emulated Lord Shiva, the god of destruction and meditation, whose own jata was said to hold back the amazing Ganges River. For others, however, shaved heads were the height of sanctity. In Hindu traditions, pilgrims regularly shave their heads before visiting sacred websites, presenting their hair as a symbol of give up and purification. Children's first haircuts *mundan had been key rites of passage, believed to cleanse awful karma from previous lives. Mourning rituals additionally required close male relatives to shave their heads, symbolizing humility and detachment from worldly attachments. Hair also communicated caste and marital reputation. Upper caste men historically kept an unmarried tuft of hair at the crown, the asterisk shika asterisk, after shaving the relaxation of the top. This pinnacle knot wasn't random. It marked them as twice born, a part of the priestly or scholarly magnificence, and obligated to carry out sacred rites. Cutting the asterisk shika without reason changed into akin to social demise. Women's hairstyles had been similarly symbolic. Unmarried women generally wore their hair loose or in simple braids, while married ladies serted their hair into buns or coiled patterns. A well-oiled, well-braided fashion denoted field, beauty, and family honor. Ornamentation various by way of area and wealth. However, jasmine vegetation, gold clips, and ornamental combs had been normally worn for the duration of festivals and weddings. Hair turned into also connected to erotic electricity. Historical texts like the asterisk Kama Sutra describe sensual hair preparations, at the same time as sculptures at temple sites like Khajuraho depict ladies with intricately styled hair cascading down their backs like liquid sculpture. Across the ancient international, hairstyles weren't pretty much becoming in. They were also used to stand out, withstand, and revolt. In many societies, changing or rejecting a dominant hairstyle became an act of defiance, subtle or overt, towards cultural norms, imperial powers, or oppressive systems. Let's start. In Judea, beneath Roman rule, the Jewish human beings, governed with the aid of strict spiritual regulation, prevented the complex grooming favored with the aid of Roman elites. Many Jewish men refused to shave their beards or style their hair in Roman style, preserving a distinct identification rooted in non-secular observance. To them, hair wasn't fashion. It became faith. And in an empire enthusiastic about assimilation, that made their look a quiet shape of protest. In historical Gaul, throughout Julius Caesar's conquest, the Celts were recognized for their wild, lime-washed hair, standing stiff and vibrant, regularly spiked into mohawk-like crests. Roman writers saw it as barbaric. However, for the Gauls, it turned into struggle paint in follicle form. The hairstyle both terrified enemies and bonded tribes in resistance to Roman profession. The Parthians and later the Sassanids, two terrific empires east of Rome, also weaponized appearance. Their kings wore lengthy, curled hair and thick beards, symbols of divine authority and cultural satisfaction. To the Romans, it appeared amazing and effeminate. To the Persians, it became royal and ancestral. Their hair have become an announcement, we are not you. Even in more limited societies, hair can be wielded as resistance. Enslaved human beings in numerous empires from Greece to the Americas were regularly forced to shave their heads to strip them of identification. However, when they had been able, they used hair to keep lineage, memory, and revolt. Braids hid seeds, beads held which means, and patterns recreated maps, myths, or mystery messages. Women, too, rebelled with hair. In Sparta, unmarried ladies famously wore their hair quick, in assessment to the lengthy locks of different Greek ladies, an expression of independence and readiness for bodily pastime. Roman ladies sometimes rejected the today's courtly tendencies to align with philosophical ideals along with Stoicism or early Christianity, embracing simpler, modest patterns. And whilst emperors fell, their hairstyles fell with them. Slicing one's imperial fashion hair can be a risky, however formidable assertion of political allegiance or descent. In most of these cases, hair wasn't just a mirror of the sector. It became a tool to reshape it. Across ancient civilizations, when voices had been silenced or swords had been drawn, the scalp have become a canvas of resistance. A braid, a buzz, a curl. It can shout louder than words ever dared.